Something that I thought was really cool upon playing Kingdom Hearts 3 was how they had these little tag team fights going on between the organization and the Guardians of Light. Like you had Lauriam and Elrona, or Marluxia and Larxene, against Sora and Mickey. You had Riku and Sora against Xigbar and Dark Riku, and it was just really cool in general. These fights did come at a sacrifice, of course, though. Because of them being tag teams, them being like 2 to 3 bosses in one, the bosses individually didn't have that many moves like they would in like a data fight or like they would in previous Kingdom Hearts games potentially. But I really liked seeing some of these characters kind of synergize with one another, do some of their DMs at the same time, and it varied from fight to fight. But something like this refined even more for future Kingdom Hearts games, I think could be just really cool. Like imagine doing this sort of thing with the foretellers in the future, and it feels a lot more like one fight, like you're fighting 2 Keyblade warriors who are just synergizing really well with one another, and you also have a party member there to like sort of help you out. Let's say in the future we have a Ava and a Envy or something against Sora and Kairi, or we have a Aced and Ira versus, I don't know, Mickey and Lauriam, I don't know, just something random. I would definitely like to see more fights like this. Now, like I said though, it varies from fight to fight, and some fights are definitely better than others, and I do generally prefer my 1v1 fights, but I think these as like moments are just insanely great. Like the Triple Xehanort fight, I think is one of the best fights in the series. I absolutely love that fight. Story-wise, I think it's really cool because it's like this is your final moment getting to fight young Xehanort, Xemnas, Ansem. In like the story, the music is insane, the battle quotes, the entire atmosphere of that fight is just amazing. It's a really good fight before the final boss. And you have Mickey and Riku there with you as well, which makes a lot of sense because when you think about these 3 characters, these 3 opponents you're fighting, and all of their stories and what happened in their respective games, Sora, Riku, and Mickey were the main 3 kind of like trying to fight them, trying to defeat them. They were there throughout a lot of that, so it made sense that that was the trio to be in that fight. The way some of these fights work is that if you're attacking a opponent before the other enemy starts their attack, typically the enemy won't try to hit you. Typically you always kind of have to have eyes in the back of your head because you don't always know if the opponent's going to hit you if they're off screen, so you got to make sure you have your camera adjusted to them, which isn't too difficult to do. I think the most annoying it is during the Xehanort and Vanitas fight, because that whole logic seems to go completely out the window. Xehanort and Vanitas, they don't care if you're attacking already, they don't care what you're doing, they just completely try to demolish you. Even during Xehanort's DM, Vanitas is still doing his attacks. That fight is something else. Even in the Triple Xehanort fight, it isn't 1-to-1, but if you have your party members alive, you're good at keeping them alive. Like we have a lot of Mega Potions. They will do a lot of work in that fight. They will do a lot of damage, and they will distract the others for you, or attempt to. The only thing that's really annoying about that, I'd say, is even if Xemnas isn't trying to attack you, Xemnas will always teleport to you to attack someone else. And Xemnas just moves around so much that he ends up hitting you anyways. In the Xigbar and Riku fight, Riku kind of respects you when you're fighting Xigbar, but there's a really easy way to get around Riku not hitting you while you're trying to fight Xigbar. Because Xigbar is typically in the air 90% of the time, and Riku, aside from Riku's DM, doesn't have any attacks that can hit you in the air. So if you just keep air stepping a Xigbar, just keep fighting Xigbar in general, you don't really have to worry about Riku for most of the fight, and Riku's just fighting Riku the whole time. Marluxia and Larxene, I think, are probably the best in terms of the tag team aspect. They feel a lot more like they're trying to synergize with one another than any other fights, I'd say. Aside from Triple Xehanort, I'd say they synergize with each other pretty well too. Like their DM is really awesome, and they have a lot of attacks that are just in sync with one another. But Marluxia and Larxene, aside from that fight, I think is really cool. They aesthetically just fit together extremely well, and I cannot wait to see more of these characters in the future. Like I would love to be able to potentially play as this sort of duo in the future that I've talked about many times. I actually do think that's decently possible as well. On higher difficulties, these fights can be a lot harder to deal with 2 characters on screen, because a lot of the time, admittedly, your party members members might be dead. Not all the time, but a decent amount of the time. I do think a big reason why some of these fights end up being a little more difficult for people as well is because managing your party members is something that's pretty helpful in these fights. Some more than others. Like I'd say in the triple Xehanort fight, that's a fight where you definitely want to keep Riku and Mickey alive if you can. If you have like 1 HP left, go ahead, and if you see them down somewhere, go ahead and use a cure on them. It will help you out. They will die a couple of times, they will die, but keeping them alive and distracting the others and having them even dish out a decent bit of damage, because Riku and Mickey definitely do a lot of damage. It'll do nothing but really help you. In the 2v2 fights, you don't have to worry about it too much because the characters can kind of take care of themselves, typically at least. I'd say even in the Terranor and Vanitas fight, Aqua and Ven will die a decent bit, but one of them often is alive and Aqua can heal, so she'll take care of Ventus. I find these fights just like really interesting. I don't really see these as replacement for the 1v1 fights. I see them as their kind of own unique thing that I would just like to see more in the future. I really like that KH3 went out of their way and did the data fights and gave us 1v1 versions of all these fights, because just having the tag team fights when we previously had these fights 1v1 with even more moves, with even more mechanics, because it was a 1v1 battle to be more engaging, it was really cool. So I think having the option for both is always nice. I think this sort of style of boss battles refined for the future could really lead to some very memorable moments, even more memorable moments, memorable fights. And if Kingdom Hearts keeps the data fight trend going, then you'll always have your 1v1 fights to compensate for that. And I think having the data fights as the alternative for people who prefer 1v1 fights is great, because one of the main annoying things for a lot of people in base KH3 was how they did want to fight some of these guys 1v1, because we had experience in KH2 how cool it was to fight Larxene or Marluxia 1v1 and saw how awesome their data fights were. Same thing with characters like Xemnas. Even young Xehanort had a cool 1v1 fight in Dream Drop Distance, so people wanted to see what that could have been like in a game like this with this sort of boss design. So the lack of options for that in base KH3 was a little annoying, but Remind definitely fixed that issue and gave us a amazing alternative, some of the best alternatives I think we've ever had for bosses in the series. Tell me what you think about this though. Personally, once again, I do prefer my 1v1 fights, but I really do find the tag team style thing interesting. I definitely hope it returns in the future because I want to see more of it, especially during story moments. I'm totally fine with stuff like this. More specifically along the lines of like a triple Xehanort or a Marluxia and Larxene. I think those two are probably some of the best style fights for me in terms of how like the tag team function goes. But how do you feel? Again, did you like this in Kingdom Hearts 3? Were you one of those people that was really annoyed with this while waiting around for the data battles? Would you be interested in seeing this return in the future? Let me know down below. But that will be about it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, share the video with a friend or a family member, and last but not least, if you have not already and want to become part of the union, all you have to do is that red subscribe button down below. My name is Prodigy, and I will talk to you guys soon. Peace out, you guys. Bye.
Now she's a daydreamer. She's always thinking about him. No more room in this picture for you to fit in. Now she's crying on the phone, telling you she's not good enough for him. When you think that she is